I picture the scene starting in Acragas, Sicily, around 570 BC. I can almost see the bronze workers huddling around a blazing fire, heating up this huge metal bull they've built. Meanwhile, inside that hollow beast, the craftsman Perilaus is pressing his scorched hands against the burning walls, screaming his lungs out. But out there, out where the crowd stands, nobody hears a man in agony. What they hear instead is this deep, echoing rumble that rolls out of the bull like music. It's a low, eerie bellow, the kind of sound you'd expect from an angry bull ready to charge. Somehow, despite the horror behind it, the noise has this strange beauty to it, almost hypnotic. The awful truth is that Perilaus didn't just design a new way to kill people. He made an instrument, a machine that twisted human suffering into a kind of performance. And now he's trapped inside the very thing he spent his life perfecting. That right there is how the story of the Brazen Bull begins. It's probably the most wickedly clever torture device anyone ever dreamed up. A polished bronze creation that turned people's dying screams into entertainment for the crowd. And the wildest part? The guy who invented it couldn't escape it. His own ambition walked him straight into the perfect punchline. He became the first person to die inside the thing he was so proud of. Even the tyrant who ordered the bull eventually ended up feeling its fire. But before I get into that, let me say this. If stories like this grab you, the ones that peel back the darkest corners of ancient history, this is exactly the kind of stuff I talk about all the time. Stick around, hit subscribe, ring the bell, however you want to say it. I drop new tales every week. Alright, let's back up for a minute. To understand how this whole nightmare got started, you have to know the man who wanted the bull built in the first place. Phalaris, the tyrant of Acragas. Phalaris clawed his way into power around 570 BC through straight-up manipulation and bloodshed. Acragas, sitting on the southern coast of Sicily, was one of the richest Greek colonies around, thanks to its booming trade in sulfur, salt, and grain. And with wealth comes men who want a bigger piece of it. Phalaris was one of those men, maybe the most ambitious of the bunch. The historian Perilaus tells the story about how Phalaris asked the people for permission to build a temple to Zeus up on the Acropolis. The city council liked the idea and handed him both the money and the workers to get it done. But Phalaris had something else in mind. Instead of a temple, he secretly built himself a fortress. Then, on the day when everyone expected this grand temple dedication, he invited the city's leaders to a celebratory feast. And while they were enjoying themselves, his hired mercenaries, who had been pretending to be construction workers the whole time, took over the armory and killed anyone who tried to fight back. By the end of the night, Acragas belonged entirely to Phalaris. What followed was almost 16 years of pure terror. The ancient accounts paint him as someone who understood cruelty almost like an art form. Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian, wrote that Phalaris kept control by using brutality that stuck in people's minds. He knew something important about ruling by fear, that fear works best when it's creative. When it becomes a story people whisper to each other long after the blood dries. Public executions didn't just wipe out his enemies, they became shows, lessons, warnings carved into people's memories. According to the stories, Phalaris roasted men alive inside their armor, turned rivals into sacrifices, and, if you believe the more extreme rumors, even ate infants. That last one was probably made up by his enemies, but honestly, the fact that people were willing to believe it says everything about how awful his reputation was. But Phalaris eventually ran into the same problem every tyrant faces. The regular stuff, crucifixions, beheadings, tossing folks off cliffs, got predictable. Sure, they worked, but they didn't impress anybody anymore. The crowds grew numb. They wanted fresh, unforgettable horror. That's when Perilaus of Athens walked into the picture. Perilaus was a master bronze worker, famous across the Greek world for his skill. People say he was ambitious, eager to impress powerful men, but in this case, tragically blind to who he was dealing with when he approached Phalaris. I remember learning that Perilaus honestly believed he was about to change his life forever. In his mind, if he built the ultimate execution machine, something that blended art, engineering, and pure cruelty, Phalaris would shower him with gold, honor, and maybe even a permanent place at court. So he threw himself into the project for months. The guy wasn't just tinkering, He was studying acoustics, experimenting with different pipes, working out how the heat would flow through the metal. He obsessed over every detail. What he ended up creating was a bronze bull that went down in history as one of the cruelest devices ever made. Picture it standing about 6 feet tall and 8 feet long, cast entirely from bronze and hollow on the inside. Its surface gleamed like a polished mirror, covered with careful engravings that showed off his artistry. But the real horror, the genius that made this thing unforgettable, was hidden inside its head. He built a whole network of tubes and chambers in there, kind of like a rough ancestor to a pipe organ. The whole purpose was to twist a dying person's screams into the sound of a real bull bellowing. The louder the victim screamed, the more the pitch shifted. Sharp, panicked shrieks would drop into these deep, miserable groans. Wild, desperate cries would come out as furious, animal-like roars. Perilaus showed all of this to Phalaris with this huge sense of pride, walking him through every little engineering trick he'd used. He explained how the victim would be shoved in through a small trapdoor along the bull's side, how a fire lit beneath the belly would slowly heat the bronze until it cooked whoever was inside, and how the crowd would hear what sounded like music powered by someone suffering. Lucian, a writer from the Roman era, tells it like this. Phalaris listened the whole time, not rushing, just studying the bull and asking all these pointed questions. He tried the door, checked the moving parts, poked around like a man inspecting a new toy. Then he turned to Perilaus and said something like, "Your invention is impressive, but how do I know it actually works? Show me. Get inside." Before Perilaus could even protest, the guards grabbed him. "My lord, please," he cried out as they dragged him toward the bull. "I made this for your enemies, not for myself. I am loyal." But Phalaris hardly reacted. He just sat there calmly, watching with the same expression a man might have while examining a bug he's never seen before. "If your loyalty is real," Phalaris said, "then you should be honored to be the first to prove your invention's value." The guards shoved Perilaus through the side door. That opening was made deliberately tight, meant to humiliate anyone forced inside. They had to fold him up awkwardly, pushing his head down, bending his limbs, just to make him fit. Inside the bull, it was pitch black and crushingly cramped. The air felt wrong, like it was already stale and suffocating. Perilaus tried to steady himself, but his hands slid across the smooth bronze, finding nothing to grip, nowhere to escape. Then the door slammed shut behind him. A heavy bolt locked into place. For a brief moment, everything went quiet. He could hear only his own breathing, fast, panicked, echoing around the metal chamber. The space wasn't even big enough for a grown man to stand. He couldn't stretch out, couldn't lie down. All he could do was crouch there in the darkness, pressed against the cold bronze that he knew would soon become blazing hot. Outside, Phalaris gave a small nod. The servants immediately began feeding wood and charcoal into the brazier beneath the bull's belly. The fire caught fast, flames curling up toward the bronze skin of the bull. And bronze, if you've ever touched a sun-baked metal surface, you know it carries heat like nothing else. Inside, Perilaus felt the temperature begin to rise within minutes. The floor under his feet warmed first. Not painful at the start, just like stepping on stone that's been sitting in the afternoon sun. He shifted, trying to balance on parts of his feet that hurt the least. But he ran out of places to move. The heat didn't spike suddenly. It built with slow, merciless consistency. About 5 minutes in, the floor was so hot that he pulled his feet up, trying to perch on his heels. By 10 minutes, he leaned back against the wall for relief, and instantly yanked himself away as that surface started to burn, too. 15 minutes in, Perilaus couldn't hold back anymore. He screamed. The kind of scream no one plans or thinks about. It just rips out of you when your skin touches metal that's hot enough to sear. He tried desperately to keep his body suspended in the center, touching as little as possible, but then even the air turned against him. Every breath scorched his lungs. The bronze walls began to glow a dull, angry red around him. And outside, just the way Perilaus had designed it, the agony inside transformed into the sound of a living bull roaring. What still gets me is how the pipes inside the bull's head worked. They caught every sound Perilaus made, every gasp, every howl, and pushed it through those bronze tubes he'd built so carefully. His high, panicked screams dropped into these deep, echoing bellows. Even the quick, ragged breaths he sucked in between cries came out sounding like a furious bull snorting through its nostrils. And when he pounded his fists against the inside walls, the metal carried the thudding in a way that almost sounded rhythmic, like heavy hooves slamming against the ground. Phalaris stepped forward, getting closer to the bull so he could hear it better. "Remarkable," he told the men around him, almost in awe. "It truly does sound like a bull." The musician plays his own requiem. Lucian says Phalaris kept Perilaus inside for about 30 minutes, just long enough to show off that everything worked exactly as advertised, but not long enough to finish him off. The tyrant had plans for him after that. When the guards finally opened the door, they hauled out what was left of Perilaus. His skin was covered in burns, some spots blistered, others already peeling away. His voice was shot from screaming, no more than a broken rasp. His hair was singed. The smell of cooked flesh drifted into the air in this awful, unforgettable way. But he was still alive. Barely, but alive. Phalaris stared down at him with this cold, almost bored expression. "You've proven your invention works perfectly," he said. "And for that I thank you. But I can't allow a man with your imagination to live. Who knows what else you might dream up, something my enemies could turn against me." He motioned toward the guards. "Take him to the cliff." They dragged Perilaus to the edge of the Acropolis, the highest point of Acragas, and tossed him off. He fell nearly 300 feet, smashing against the rocks below. Just like that, the tyrant kept his new toy and made sure the only person who truly understood its secrets wouldn't live to build another. But not everything died with Perilaus. For the next 15 years, the Brazen Bull became the centerpiece of Phalaris' entire regime of fear. He didn't waste it on everyday criminals, petty thieves, murderers, or anyone who could simply be beheaded or thrown from a cliff. No, the bull was saved for special occasions, moments when he wanted a spectacle, moments that needed to stick in people's minds. It was used on political rivals who threatened his rule, on wealthy families whose land he wanted to seize, on visiting ambassadors who needed to go home with a story that would terrify their kings. Even philosophers ended up inside it, anyone who talked too loudly about justice or the nature of tyranny. Diodorus Siculus, one of the Greek historians who wrote about Phalaris, said the tyrant especially loved rolling the bull out during festivals and public celebrations. He'd time the executions with religious holidays and set the bronze bull right in the middle of the city plaza. Everyone was expected to show up. If you didn't, people noticed, and that alone could get you into trouble. The whole thing became ritual. Theater, really. The condemned would be marched through the city while people gathered to watch. Heralds would shout out their so-called crimes, sometimes true, often made up. Then the victim was stripped naked in front of the crowd and shoved into the bull. Lighting the fire wasn't just a practical step. It was ceremonial, almost like part of a sacred performance. Sometimes musicians even played alongside the execution, blending flutes and drums with the warped screams echoing from the bull's mouth. Some people died within an hour when the heat overwhelmed them and their lungs burned out from breathing superheated air. Others lasted longer, especially when the executioners wanted to drag things out. They'd adjust the flames, letting the metal cool just enough to keep the victim alive before building the heat back up again. Ancient accounts claim the longest anyone survived in that bull was nearly 4 hours. By the end, nobody could even tell if the noises inside were screams or just the final rattles of a body giving out. One of the most disturbing stories comes from the poet Pindar. He describes a time when Phalaris threw a banquet while an execution was happening. He placed the bronze bull right outside the dining hall so the music, as he called it, could drift into the feast while he and his guests enjoyed their meal. I still can't get over something people said Phalaris once bragged about at one of his feasts, that the screams drifting out of the bronze bull actually made his food taste better. He told his guests that suffering and luxury should always sit side by side, like two ingredients in the same dish. And honestly, even though it sounds unbelievable, the fact anyone ever believed he said it shows just how twisted his image had become. But the bull didn't just destroy the people who went into it. Its presence alone was its own kind of violence. Just knowing it existed was a threat. Political rivals could be warned they might meet the bull if they stepped out of line. Merchants who griped about taxes were reminded that the bull never stops being hungry. Kids in Akragas grew up with that bronze monster looming over the city square like some kind of ugly reminder of who really controlled their lives. But, like every tyrant I've ever read about, Phalaris eventually made the same mistake. He thought he'd rule forever. By 554 BC, after almost 16 brutal years, the people of Akragas had finally reached their breaking point. The rebellion hadn't appeared out of nowhere. Folks had been plotting quietly, hiding their anger, waiting for the perfect moment. And when that moment came, it came fast. According to several ancient writers, Diodorus Siculus, Polyaenus, and others, the rebels stormed Phalaris' palace during a festival when security was relaxed. Phalaris was taken alive. His guards saw things turning against him and abandoned ship. And suddenly, the same people who'd spent years being forced to watch those horrific executions found themselves holding all the power. Their decision was unanimous. Phalaris would die the same way he'd killed so many others. Lucian gives us the most vivid version of what happened next. The rebels dragged him through the streets, all the way past the plaza where the bull had stood for years like an idol of pure fear. The bull was still there, cold, polished, hated. They stripped him naked. Then they opened the door and shoved the tyrant inside his own invention. When they lit the fire beneath the bull that final time, something shifted in the crowd. For the first time in 16 years, people didn't run, didn't tremble, didn't look away. They stayed. They watched. Some accounts say they even cheered. The screams that came out that day, filtered through Perilaus' complex pipe system into deep, animalistic roars, were different from every execution before. Those weren't the sounds of helpless victims anymore. They were the sounds of justice, a payback, of a city finally able to breathe again. Phalaris lasted around 2 hours before the noises stopped. When the people finally opened the bull and pulled out his body, the inside was blackened and stained. They left his corpse without a burial, denying him the funeral rites that Greek culture believed were essential for a soul to find its way to the afterlife. As for the bull itself, that's where the history gets a little foggy. Some accounts say the people melted it down right away, determined to wipe out every trace of their oppression. Others claim they kept it as a warning, and that it eventually traveled to Carthage, then later to Rome, where it might have been displayed as a grim curiosity. Pliny the Elder wrote that he'd seen a bronze bull in Rome that was supposed to be Phalaris' original, though by his era, 6 centuries later, there was no real way to know for sure. But the story of the Brazen Bull carries a message that rings through time. The tools tyrants create eventually destroy them. Perilaus thought his invention would earn him wealth and permanent favor. Instead, he became the bull's first victim, dying before it was even truly put to work. His skill, his knowledge of sound and metal was twisted into something monstrous. And Phalaris used that same monstrous creation to rule through fear, convinced nothing could touch him as long as the bull stood behind him. Yet in the end, the bull became his tomb. And the screams it produced in his last moments weren't feared. People celebrated them. The Brazen Bull isn't just some gruesome artifact of ancient cruelty. It's a reminder of what happens when human creativity is pushed into darkness. A reminder of how power warps judgment, and how even the most horrifying symbols of control eventually crumble. No confirmed original examples of the bull survive today. All we have are the stories, preserved by ancient historians who wanted the future to understand just how far cruelty can go, and what ultimately becomes of those who depend on it. So the next time you hear the phrase, hoisted by their own petard, think of Perilaus and Phalaris. Think of how people who build machines of suffering often end up crushed by them. Think of how tyranny always, eventually, collapses under the weight of its own brutality. The bronze bull might be gone, but the lesson it left behind is still very much alive. Karma has a long memory, and sooner or later it shows up for everyone.